Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to make brief mentions of two controversial dynasties. The first is financial, and we're going to start with David Rockefeller, who died recently at the age of 101. David Rockefeller was the last of the third generation of Rockefellers, the last surviving grandchild of John D. Rockefeller. So that made him one of the richest men in the world, and he was quite a controversial character. Here's a report on the death of David Rockefeller.
David Rockefeller, businessman and heir to the Rockefeller fortune, has died. According to a family spokesperson, he passed away at his home in Pocantico Hills, New York. He was the last surviving grandson of John D. Rockefeller, the turn-of-the-century industrialist who many consider to have been the richest American of all time. David Rockefeller was president of Chase Manhattan Bank from 1961 through the early 80s. He was known for his actions in the international arena, both with Chase and as a private citizen. He guided the bank into developing presence in communist countries such as the Soviet Union and China. In 1973, he founded the Trilateral Commission, an organization intended to foster international cooperation which critics accuse of encroaching on individual or national autonomy. And in 1979, he helped bring the Shah of Iran to the U.S. for medical treatment, which triggered the Iranian hostage crisis. After he left Chase, much of his life was devoted to philanthropy, particularly in the area of the arts.
David Rockefeller is one of those guys, there's nobody neutral on him. You either loved him or you hated him. That report was basically a sort of a negative. They mentioned this Trilateral Commission and his Shah of Iran stuff. But he was a great philanthropist. He was one of the most important people in New York philanthropy, possibly the most important. And while most accounts suggest he wasn't a great banker when he was the head of Chase Manhattan, he was particularly adept at giving away money as the embodiment of capitalism. One of the things I've always felt about the Rockefeller family is a lot of people criticize them for being such ardent capitalists, but they still take their money when it's given to them. And the other thing is, if you compare them with most of the other great billionaires, the Rockefeller family has given away far, far more money. I know on the internet a lot of people portray David Rockefeller as some sort of evil demon, but he did a lot of good in his life for a lot of people in a lot of countries worldwide. Just want to say one other thing. One of his daughters, Abby Rockefeller, read my book and liked it, so hey, they're okay with me. We're going to move on now to our next controversial dynasty, and that's the sports dynasty, by mentioning Jerry Krause, who died recently at the age of 77, and he was the general manager of the Chicago Bulls during the time they won 6 world championships. He was a nice Jewish boy from the northwest side of Chicago, grew up in Albany Park, not too far from my producer Sid, not too far from my grandmother. He went to Taft High School. Parents had a delicatessen on Lawrence Avenue, and he had a great eye for athletic talent. He started out as a baseball scout. That was his first love. Then he palled up with Jerry Reinsdorf and became the general manager of the Bulls. And while he didn't draft Michael Jordan, he put together the team around him, including his trade for this unknown kid from Central Arkansas who turned out to be Scottie Pippen, one of the greatest players who ever played. And he also put a lot of other role players around Jordan and Pippen. Here's NBA.com on Jerry Krause.
The NBA family mourns the loss of the architect of the Chicago Bulls dynasty of the 1990s, the late Jerry Krause, who passed away at the age of 77. Krause, a native of Chicago, helped to engineer 6 NBA championship teams in 8 seasons after taking over the Bulls operations department in 1985. He was named Executive of the Year by his peers in 87-88 and 95-96. Krause's decisions in terms of basketball evaluation are a huge part of the foundation of the Chicago Bulls' remarkable run.
We need to go out and play 82 basketball games and see where we are, and we think this is going to be a very good basketball team. We can stay healthy. We think it's going to be an excellent team.
And the Chicago Bulls have won their first ever NBA championship.
After starting out as a scout, Jerry Krause spent a career following his finely tuned instincts for recognizing talent. As the GM of his hometown Chicago Bulls, he built around Michael Jordan by seeing promise in a young coach and acquiring, among other players, Scottie Pippen. The nucleus was in place for 3 consecutive NBA titles.
Jerry Krause was a great general manager. I mean, he inherited Michael Jordan, put all the pieces around Michael, and found Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson was coaching in the Continental Basketball Association with the Albany Patroons when Jerry rescued him.
Krause continued to retool the Bulls roster for even more success. Adding Dennis Rodman and Tony Kukoc resulted in a second three-peat for the Bulls.
Chicago is world champions once more.
I'm so proud of these players and the staff, and this is for the fans back in Chicago, the greatest sports fans in the world.
A 2-time NBA Executive of the Year, Jerry Krause always will be remembered as the man who built a dynasty in Chicago.
If you had to give credit to one man, the guy that put them all here, Jerry Krause.
Jerry Krause was controversial because he didn't get along that well with Michael Jordan or some of the other players. He made a quote once, "Players don't win championships, organizations do," and that didn't sit well with a lot of the players or the fans. He wasn't really a bad guy. I think his major problem was that he was socially inept. He didn't handle the press very well. He was a little too secretive. In his defense, he did appreciate Michael Jordan and all his skills, more than Michael Jordan probably appreciated Jerry Krause's skills. Bulls don't win those 6 championships without Michael Jordan, obviously, and maybe they do win them without Jerry Krause, but we'll never know for sure. We're done with our controversial dynasty, so we're going to move on to our feature, Jimmy Breslin, who died recently at the age of 88. Nice Irish boy from Queens, and he became one of the great columnists and reporters of the second half of the 20th century. For 4 decades, he wrote primarily for the New York Daily News. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1986, and his career was like a class in top-notch journalism. Here's New York City television on the death of Jimmy Breslin.
We got word just before we came on the air that Jimmy Breslin has died. For those of you who don't know, he was sort of the epitome of the hard-charging, hard-drinking, cigar-chomping New York tabloid columnist. He won a Pulitzer Prize for a commentary at one point in his heyday. He really kind of set the mold for lots of other people who did this for a living. Back when newspapers and newspaper columnists were much more essential than they are today. He was also a bit of a media critic as well as an author. He said, media are plural for mediocrity. And Jimmy Breslin also said, don't call me a journalist. I hate the word. It's pretentious.
A couple of years back, when he was 83, Jimmy Breslin sat for an interview, and in the feature they discussed facets of his career, including the famous column he wrote the weekend that John F. Kennedy died.
Some reporters become legends. They inspire readers to become writers. And Jimmy Breslin is the best living example of this. A man whose newspaper column expressed the soul of New York City for decades. His no BS independence and commitment to telling a story developed a devoted readership, memorably expressed in this clip from When Harry Met Sally.
Let's just say I'm really just not a big fan of Jimmy Breslin.
Well, he's the reason I became a writer, but that's not important.
Breslin was so famous in his prime that he became that rare reporter who was called on by ad agencies to give credibility to their beer pitches.
I'm Jimmy Breslin, a writer, but beer is a subject that's not exactly unknown to me. So I tried one. I liked it. It's good beer. I tried another. It's better than good. It's a good drinking beer.
Now 83, Jimmy Breslin still lives in New York City with his wife, Ronnie Eldridge. He recently published a book on Branch Rickey and still writes an occasional column for the New York Daily News. I had the rare opportunity to sit down with him at his home earlier this week and talk about his life in newspapers.
When you look back at your career as a columnist, what did you love the most?
Doing it. Yeah, it was good to do it. Still is. Well, I mean, you can get some work, some jobs that'll bore you until you're dead. So you better look for something that's got a little tingle to it.
When you were picking a story back in the day, what did you look for in a great story? What got you fired up to write?
Let that happen to you. You're not going to force it. Let something going on. Just keep looking and stop freaking talking when you're out. Just go out and listen. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open and keep moving. That's the main thing.
Now, Breslin pulled no punches in his columns. He once said that rage is the only quality that has kept me or anybody I ever studied writing columns for newspapers.
Disliking people is good. That helps, because you'll write about anybody you don't like. I think that's very good. The ones that you like, you got to take a lot of time to get under the likeness to the lousiness that must be there. You got to look for it if they're likable. That takes too long. It's much better if they're right up front with what they are.
Now, one of his most famous columns came just days after the death of President Kennedy. While all the other reporters were chasing the same story of the funeral procession, Breslin looked elsewhere and told the story of the man responsible for preparing the president's grave at Arlington National Cemetery. I asked Jimmy Breslin to read part of that work.
Clinton Pollard was pretty sure he was going to be working on Sunday, so when he woke up at 9 a.m. in his 3-room apartment on Corcoran Street, and this is a Washington Dateline, he put on khaki overalls before going into the kitchen for breakfast. His wife, Nettie, made bacon and eggs for him. Pollard was in the middle of eating when he received a phone call he had been expecting. It was from Mazo Walchik, the foreman of the gravediggers at Arlington National Cemetery, which is where Pollard works for a living. "Polly, could you please be here by 11 this morning?" what Charlotte asked. "I guess you know what it's for." Pollard did. He hung up the phone, finished breakfast, and left his apartment so he could spend Sunday digging a grave for John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Breslin was a deadline artist, able to write beautiful stories under punishing deadlines. What would you do to inspire yourself when you were writing a column on deadline?
Fear the clock. That's the thing. If there's a lot of time, it's good. I'll stop and talk about how great I am. Have some coffee or something, scrolling around. But no, you had every minute was precious. The subject itself you had to know was important, and that was it. As long as it got done quick enough, I was going to get paid for doing it that way. Yeah.
It's always for money, never for love?
You better have the money to get home with, yeah. You work at it. It's a working life. That's what it is.
Well, my friend Bruce, who's won a Pulitzer Prize for journalism himself, says the two greatest columnists of our generation were Jimmy Breslin in New York and Mike Royko in Chicago. Jimmy Breslin, probably the superior reporter. Mike Royko, probably the superior writer. They were the Mantle and Mays of newspaper columnists. Well, we're going to close tonight with Chuck Barris, who died recently at the age of 87. And Chuck Barris was the Schlockmeister, the man who made bad taste funny on television. He was a nice Jewish boy out of Philadelphia. He had a fascinating life, but he's best known for introducing to American television the dating game, the Newlywed Game, and the Gong Show. He tried to make them entertaining, and he was unapologetic about their bad taste. Here's a brief report on Chuck Barris.
Chuck Barris is a television pioneer. The man behind the dating game, the Newlywed Game, and the Gong Show has been called the forefather of reality TV.
From the Chuck Barris stages in Hollywood, California, it's the Newlywed Game.
TV producer Chuck Barris created such wild game shows as the Newlywed Game and the Dating Game.
From Hollywood, the dating capital of the world, in color, it's the Dating Game.
But he is probably best known for the role of bumbling MC on his cult classic spoof of talent shows called The Gong Show. Barris's life was so unusual, George Clooney directed a movie about it.
Rather than killing ourselves trying to find good acts, we just put bad ones and kill them.
Here's Jamie Farr, who was a panelist on The Gong Show, talking about its most famous moment, and I've included J.P. Morgan's comment at the end of the act.
It was the famous Gong Show with the popsicle twins. And, oh, my goodness. I was on that show. He had the two kids come out, teenagers, girls, erotically having a popsicle, each one of them. And I went out to the East Coast, but I'm not sure what happened on the West Coast. I don't know whether they cut that out or not. He was really something else, Chuck was.
Same thing worked out.
Do you know that that's the way I started?
Well, in his autobiography, Chuck Barris claimed he was a CIA assassin, and he claims to have killed about 70 people, but that's never been proven. His career was essentially over after his daughter died of a drug overdose, and that sort of took the fire out of Chuck Barris. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and what else can we close with for Chuck Barris but the song he wrote in 1962 that went to number 3 on the charts. It was the biggest hit of Freddie Cannon's career, and it also launched Chuck Barris's career. In the summer of 1962, teenagers all over America were singing the Chuck Barris penned hit Palisades Park. So in tribute to him, here it is.
I was driving along the West River Drive, coming back into the city, and I saw an amusement park across the river in New Jersey. I wrote a song, Palisades Park, and that wasn't the original name of the song. The original name of the song was Amusement Park or something like that. And they named that song after that amusement park on the other side of the river. The record company did. It was the first creative thing I ever did, and it was so wonderful. Whenever I would hear that song on the radio, I'd have to pull the car over and stop because I was so excited to hear this song being played. It was just wonderful. That was 1962, the year my daughter was born, Della. I went out to California, but I had just written Palisades Park, and Palisades Park was a big hit, the record by Freddie Cannon. Right. And I was getting money from that record, so I used that money to get myself out of this motel that I was staying in and into the Beverly Hills Hotel. I had called everybody from the motel, and nobody answered. But when I called them from the Beverly Hills Hotel, everybody answered.
We hated at a hot dog stand. We danced around to a rockin' band. I gave that girl a hug. And the title of love. You never know how great it can be. With this bottle at the bottom of a fairy